know this. Today was an historic day in Washington, D.C. as Pope Francis did something no other pope has done in the 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church. He addressed a joint meeting of the United States Congress. The Pope's speech, which lasted just around an hour, was a perfect example of why he's become such a magnetic figure since taking over the Catholic Church 2 years ago. He condemned the arms trade, called on Congress to take action to save the environment, and demanded universal housing, all in the same speech. He also urged Congress to protect the environment and cultivate a culture of care, in line with what he laid out in his papal encyclical Laudato Si. Take a look.
Now is the time for courageous action and strategies aimed at implementing a culture of care and an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature.
Over Francis's 2 years as Pope, we've heard a lot of this kind of talk, so hearing him talk once again about social justice wasn't all that surprising, but what was surprising was how he talked about issues that dominate the religious life here in America. When he talked about the value of all life, for example, something that's normally code for abortion, he didn't even mention abortion by name. He alluded to it, but then quickly switched to talking about something else, the death penalty. Check it out.
The Golden Rule also reminds us of our responsibility to protect and defend human life at every stage of its development. This conviction has led me from the beginning of my ministry to advocate at different levels the global abolition of the death penalty.
This wasn't the only moment during which the Pope deviated from the kind of thinking we here in the United States typically hear from religious leaders. When he talked about family life and how important it was, he again alluded to an issue that conservatives care about, opposing gay marriage, but then switched to talking about how the economy hurts people trying to start families.
At the risk of oversimplifying, we might say that we live in a culture with precious young people known to start a family because they lack possibilities for the future.
It's not exactly the kind of thing Republicans talk about when they talk about family values now, is it? But here's the thing. It's not like the Pope is some kind of crazy radical. A lot of his views are perfectly in line with those of most Christians around the world. So why are so many of our supposedly Christian leaders and politicians here in the United States so opposed to what he's trying to say? Joining me now to break down some of the highlights of the Pope's speech and to give us his thoughts on this historic occasion is Rob Boston, Communications Director for Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Rob, welcome.
Thank you, Tom.
Nice to have you here with us. First up, what was your general reaction to the Pope's address?
Well, what I find most fascinating about this guy is how he is so polarizing for the American right wing. Mm-hmm. I mean, normally when the Pope speaks about his opposition to abortion or same-sex marriage, then of course he's this great moral leader that everybody should listen to. But when he speaks on climate change, economic justice, immigration, then suddenly to the right wing, well, you know, he doesn't know anything more than your second cousin in New Jersey. You don't have to listen to him.
Right.
So he's definitely been a very polarizing figure, absolutely.
Yeah. I thought it was fascinating. Shepard Smith over on Fox even made the comment that when did protecting the environment, protecting the poor, welcoming the stranger, I mean, these are, right out of Matthew 25, not the environment, but pretty much everything else. When did these become political? When did these become left-right issues? How did that happen?
Right, and some of that isn't really new for the church. Remember, the U.S. Catholic bishops in 1984 issued a pastoral letter on economic inequality, an issue that you hear a lot about today. But here they were talking about that in 1984. Now, a lot of people didn't pay attention, and some people said, oh, they're advocating socialism. So they have been talking about that for a long time. The difference, I think, is that this Pope is a much more charismatic figure for people around the world. So when he speaks about those same issues, well, more people are paying attention. But you still have that resistance in this country from the far right. I mean, as much as I'd like to think that things will change, because one of the messages the Pope is giving is the need to listen to one another, I suspect that tomorrow we'll be right back in Congress to a fight over whether or not to shut down the government over fake Planned Parenthood videos.
Right.
And that same stridency on both sides.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the United States is the largest manufacturer and exporter of weapons in the world, I believe. And something that most Americans don't know and we don't pay much attention to. You know, we say, oh, we don't make anything in America. Well, yeah, we do. We make, you know, like all those bombs that are dropping in Syria right now, coming out of Saudi airplanes, they all have Made in the USA printed on them. This is what the Pope had to say about this global weapons trade. Check this out.
Here we have to ask ourselves, why are deadly weapons being sold to those who plan to inflict untold suffering on individuals and society? Sadly, the answer, as we all know, is simply for money. Money that is drenched in blood, often innocent blood.
This is a powerful indictment of a major industry in the United States and one of the largest recipients of federal welfare benefits, you know, for lack of a better way to say it. Your thoughts on the Pope going there, talking about this stuff?
Well, it's stunning. And again, the sort of thing that to the right wing in this country, which very much encourages this military-industrial complex as a large portion of our economy, they're going to have to recoil from that. You know, but the important thing to remember about the Pope and the things he's saying, is stunning as some of them may be, at the end of the day, you are talking about some core doctrines that still rub a lot of progressives the wrong way. The role of women in church. He doesn't seem to be taking a step back even from the rather restrictive rules on contraceptive access. In fact, while he was here in D.C., he stopped at the Little Sisters of the Poor, which many people feel was kind of giving them a tacit endorsement in a fight they're having over birth control access. Some of the issues dealing with same-sex marriage and so on, where he hasn't really stepped back at all. So there are things here for both sides to look at and feel pretty good about. But I do think there's a really strong challenge here to conservatives in this country, people like Rick Santorum and other folks who are Catholic, who claim to speak for the conservative wing of the church, are having a difficult time processing a lot of what this man is saying.
Yeah, it seems. I mean, he's not even all that radical on economic issues. Here's what he had to say about solving poverty.
I would encourage you to keep in mind all those people around us who are trapped in a cycle of poverty. They too need to be given hope. The fight against poverty and hunger must be fought constantly and on many fronts, especially in its cause. It goes without saying that part of this great effort is the creation and distribution of wealth.
Now, Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon both talked about poverty. They both were presidents when the top income tax rate was 91% after you made about $3 million a year. They both oversaw a country where the middle class was expanding, and I don't get it why speaking about poverty is something that should anger Republicans to the point that, you know, people like Sean Duffy don't even go listen to the Pope. Instead, they just sit on Fox News and complain about it.
There was a real pivot moment in this country, and I don't know when it happened, but I think about when I was a kid and the Great Society programs, Head Start, which I personally benefited from as a child, Pell Grants for college students, the sort of things that help people get a leg up into a stable middle-class lifestyle so you could be a productive tax-paying citizen. That would be seen as a good thing. And when I was a kid in the 60s, the Catholic Church was firmly in that camp. Yeah. I think at some point there was a societal pivot during the Reagan years. Some of the church hierarchy and members were dragged along with that idea of this sort of Ayn Rand sink or swim bootstrap capitalism became ascendant. And if there's although I disagree with the Pope on many issues, I want to be clear about that, especially social issues like marriage equality, choice, and so on. If there's one thing that he could do that would be very powerful, it would be to get the church back into that social justice mode. It's always been there, but I think it got a little buried after the Johnson years and the Great Society and the rise of that more capitalistic-oriented.
I think it mostly got buried in the early '60s when John the 23rd died, and you know the whole Vatican II thing kind of collapsed and got taken over by the conservatives, and Opus Dei rose, and out of that we ended up with the Scalia version of Catholicism. Anyhow, Rob Boston, it's great talking with you. Thanks so much for dropping by.